The Chicago Bears did not play particularly well against the Cincinnati Bengals on Saturday, even with the starters in there against Bengals backups. And it was a reminder of why the preseason is still important to iron out those kinks before week one.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Join all the action at FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a home run this MLB season. On the show today, we're going to look back at the Bears' preseason loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, starting with the starters, who didn't play a ton, so we definitely shouldn't overreact. But I do want to get into why Ben Johnson thought it was necessary for those starters to be out there and what their performance means for whether or not they're going to play again next Saturday against the Tennessee Titans like they did last year in the second and third preseason games. We'll have to spend some time looking at the left tackle battle in particular, as one of the few starting jobs that's still open and up for grabs, and also did not play particularly well against the Bengals. And we'll look at a few other guys that maybe are a little bit lesser known that absolutely are cementing their 53-man roster spots now with multiple strong preseason game performances thus far. But it was a surprise to, I think, most of us, if not all of us, that Caleb Williams and a fairly close to full starting lineup for the Chicago Bears took the field on Saturday. We didn't find out until a few hours before the game when Ben Johnson revealed that it would be the case. Sounds like he didn't tell his players until a day or two before the game on Saturday. But the Bengals had announced earlier in the week, Thursday or Friday, I don't remember which day, that their starters weren't going to play. So we kind of assumed that, well, Ben Johnson may not want to put his starters out there against Bengals backups because it just wouldn't be as valuable of a experience. And if they were doing the joint practice against the Bengals, and the Bengals decided, well, our starters don't need any more run, then maybe the Bears might decide similarly. But they did not. And we saw the entire healthy starting offense minus Joe Thuney, who gets, sort of the royal treatment of, you don't need to be out there at all. And we saw the healthy members of the Bears defense, I think minus TJ Edwards. I don't think he's seriously injured, but didn't play out there. But otherwise, Jalen Johnson, Montez Sweat, Caleb Williams, Colston Loveland, Rome Odoo, starters all out there for the first drive on offense. And I think the first two drives-ish on defense, kind of a drive and a half, because the first one was particularly long. And it was long because the Bears defense didn't play that well either. You do the box score stats from the game, and you see Caleb Williams is 2 of 5 passing for the game and wasn't particularly, carving up the Bengals defense necessarily up and down the field. The Bengals come out there with their starting quarterback as Josh Johnson, who's played for 14 NFL teams and has always been a journeyman around the NFL, who's 40 years old, and he leads his offense on a 14-play drive or whatever it was, the first drive of the game against this Bears defense. And it was not encouraging. This was not a sharp, ready to go, locked in, dialed in team ready for week one and ready to play their best football right out of the gate. And, in mid to late August, maybe no team is truly in that position, but I think it was a good measuring stick for Ben Johnson and his staff to see, okay, well, how are they doing right now? How close to ready are they? And it felt like they still have some real work to do, understanding that it was not the full defense. It was not the full offense. And so we're not going to sit here and say that, all of a sudden we should be concerned about Caleb or the defense necessarily because of a bad drive or two against the Cincinnati Bengals. But you would have liked to have your starters come out against their backups and make that distinction very obvious by the performance that we saw on the field. But instead, the offense has a holding penalty that puts them in first and long, and they go 3 straight incompletions and take a field goal. And, Caleb misses on Colston Loveland working up the seam. And there was what at first appeared to be a miscommunication with Rome Odoo on the right side there. And as it turns out, Caleb said after the game he intentionally threw that ball away, that he was aiming towards Rome Odunze, because as he was loading up to fire that to Odunze, there was a linebacker who had been at the line of scrimmage who then dropped back into coverage and then ultimately didn't see that Caleb didn't anticipate he was going to be there, saw he was going to be in the way of the ball, and kind of intentionally missed that pass. So it wasn't like he was being totally inaccurate on that throw in particular. He also had a batted pass, so like two of his incompletions weren't like intentionally, or two of his incompletions weren't inaccurate bad decisions or bad throws. Like one was batted out of his control, one was intentionally thrown away. So like you can nitpick the 5 plays. The point being is like it was only 5 pass attempts, and Roschon Johnson ran the ball fairly well on that first drive, had one of those nice runs called back by a penalty, which is kind of the bigger concern there, right? It was, the Bears had 11 penalties in this game, and maybe you can point to Ron Torbert and the refereeing crew flagged the Bengals 9 times. Maybe they were a little bit flag happy, but like still, like you have control over whether you're false starting or whether you've got illegal formation or whether you're holding, and on either side of the ball. And the Bears were not sharp and crisp. And I think that's why we saw them play in this preseason game, because we heard Ben Johnson after the game talk about why his starters were out there based on what they had seen against the Bengals in the joint practice. That joint practice on Wednesday or Thursday, my days are mixing up now, I think it was Thursday, that joint practice was kind of was going to be the deciding factor, right? If they come out and perform at joint practice, up like really crisp and sharp and clean, then maybe the starters don't need to play at all against the Bengals. But as Ben Johnson will describe here, it was not the cleanest operation in the joint practice. So sort of, I don't know if you want to call it their punishment, but the result is they got to play in the preseason game, and they're going to take the exact same approach this week when they have a joint practice against the Titans, and use that practice to decide whether the starters will play in the final preseason game like they did last year in the 3rd preseason. So here's how Ben Johnson described that evaluation process that will still be very much up in the air this week.
Ben, what did you take away from your starters on Thursday in the joint practice?
There was a healthy amount of back and forth throughout. I thought our defense competed really, really hard throughout that one against a really good unit. I mean, the quarterback is top 5 quarterback in the NFL, and of course those pass catchers are outstanding as well. So there's a healthy amount of back and forth. I thought, some periods they got us, other periods we really got them, and I think that's what you want to see in a setting like that. Offensively, I think we left a little bit out there. Wasn't very pleased. First 7 snaps of that practice, we had 3 procedure issues, that quarterback center exchange or not getting off the ball at the same time. It's just, we talk all week about starting fast and wanting to start the practice fast, and that didn't quite translate. And so, we had some work that we want to end up cleaning up going into next week. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is it's going to be a little bit of a rinse and repeat with a different opponent. And so we'll go on the road again and get a good joint practice in with a team that's got a lot of good talent. I know they reloaded similar to what Cincinnati did, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, and I know that they're really well coached throughout. So it'll be a good challenge, and it'll be good for us to finish this last little bit of training camp, and make sure we're ready for week 1.
Are you going to take a similar approach and see how Thursday
that's the plan. That's been the plan all along, is to work through these weeks and see where we're at.
So it's definitely not out of the question that the starters could play again next week in the 3rd and final preseason game. That's how Ben Johnson did it last year, where they didn't play the starters in the first game, but played them in the 2nd and 3rd, in part for some of these very same reasons. I mean, I think the good news was in the game against the Bengals, you didn't see the snapping and lining up issues for the starting offense that they had at the joint practice, but it still wasn't a perfectly smooth, clean operation against the other team's backup defense. And so I do think Ben Johnson's going to want to see a bit more from this starting group. Like, not that he's looking at that preseason game and the 9 snaps they had on offense and they're panicking and worrying that, oh no, the offense is going to be bad, but just hey, you're 3 weeks away from the first game of the season, and it needs to be a lot better than that. And it's sort of a reminder that certainly they've made progress throughout training camp, but there's still a lot more work to be done here to get them to that point. And part of that will be getting a little bit healthier at some point when, you'll have, I guess Swift wasn't injured, but he got to sit out this game, and Monungai will come back from injury at some point, and Luther Burden will come back from injury at some point. And hopefully you have more clarity at the left tackle position, in addition to all of the guys on defense who need to come back from injuries sooner rather than later. But I didn't see much from the left tackle position that made me feel better in this preseason game. And I'm curious, based on the way the Bears played it, it showed some confidence in Braxton Jones, but I'm not sure that the performance we saw on the field necessarily backed that up. So I think this will be a really pivotal week at that position that I want to break down next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gusto. Running a small business means wearing a lot of hats. And sometimes payroll, HR, and benefits can quickly become some of the most time-consuming tasks on the list. But Gusto helps simplify those responsibilities with one platform designed to make managing a team easier. Gusto is an online payroll and benefits software built for small businesses. It's all-in-one, remote-friendly, and incredibly easy to use. So you can pay, hire, onboard, and support your team from anywhere. From automatic payroll tax filing and simple direct deposits to health benefits, 401ks, and built-in onboarding tools, Gusto brings the day-to-day HR tasks together in one place. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/lockedonnfl and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/lockedonnfl. That's Gusto, gusto.com/lockedonnfl. I don't want to overreact to the struggles of the starters out there, but maybe is there an exception for what we saw at left tackle in the game as a position that certainly don't want to overreact to, but also don't want to underreact to what was a struggle for Braxton Jones and better from Theo Benedet, but against third, like second and third string guys, like even later into the game before Theo Benedet goes to left tackle, and not necessarily like some lockdown, clear cut, wow, Theo dominated while Braxton Jones struggled. That was not necessarily the case when I go back and watch the tape. There was a couple of left tackles that struggled in this game. I think Jones was worse than Theo, but it's also a small sample size. So, I mean, I'm trying to be cautious of, the size of the reaction here. I mean, in this game, Braxton Jones played 15 plays. So he did the first drive and then the next 6 plays before Theo Benedet took over. And Benedet played right tackle with the backups for a little while and then moved over to left tackle. And even Theo himself played, I think, 28 snaps over the course of the game. And, so quite a few at left tackle, some at right tackle. Like, those are not a large sample size to tell us for sure what these players are and aren't. And I'm not necessarily ready to say, oh, well, clearly Braxton Jones must be bad still because he didn't play that well on 15 snaps against the Bengals. But you would have liked to see, again, like a starting caliber left tackle play better against backup Bengals defensive ends. We did not see their prized free agent signing Boye Mafe out there pass rushing. And I don't think Miles Murphy or Shamar Stewart were doing a lot out there. Like, he was lined up against one of their backups as a former 6th round pick, Cedric Johnson, who was giving him some tough snaps out there. And that's where you get the concern, right? I think in the preseason, I don't really think there's a lot we can glean on the 11-on-11 aspect of like, okay, how well is your offense operating? How well is your defense operating? Because you're not scheming and game planning for the opponent. You're trying to show as little as possible. You're using very basic plays on offense and basic coverages on defense. So like the group as a whole, it's hard to judge. But individually, you can see, you can glean more in one-on-one battles where it's like, yeah, you're not, as a pass rusher, you're not necessarily hiding pass rush moves. You're trying to make your 53-man roster and win your spot on the depth chart. Like one-on-one, you're putting everything out there as an individual. Well, your coaches and your team aren't trying to put it all out there. If you're fighting for your job, you're putting it all out there. So like Braxton Jones wasn't getting the vanilla version of opposing pass rushers moves. Maybe it was vanilla blitzes, but like individually one-on-one, he's getting their best punch. And gave up a little pressure a couple times. Like a couple times he was beaten. The quarterback got rid of it right before it really affected the pass, but it just was like bearing down, pun not intended, on Caleb a little bit and Case Keenum for a little bit after that. And you would have just liked to see a much more solid showing from Braxton Jones. And maybe we were kind of maybe it was a little bit wishful thinking that, coming off of an injury last year, an injury the year before that just being healthy would be enough for Braxton Jones to be a drastically better player than he was before. But I think we maybe, I don't want to say overestimated or overprojected, but like given how much injury he's dealt with the last 2 seasons, he's kind of just picking up where he left off before, right? It wasn't like over these last 2 years, he's had 24 months of drills and practice and working on his technique and coaching him up and getting him where he was. Like this offseason's probably been the healthiest he's been and the most opportunity for growth and development. But like, as much as we say, hey, this is a player in his 5th season, you probably want him to be better than that. But like, he's missed full off seasons of his career. He doesn't have a full 5 off seasons of growth and development, or even a full 5 seasons of, or I guess this is his 5th season. So a full 4 seasons of starts and playing time and ability to get better. Like he just has missed some of that development time in that process. So maybe he's kind of starting now closer to where he finished last time, which isn't as advanced as we'd hope. We kind of assume, well, every year he's going to get a little bit better, and maybe he's not as advanced because he hasn't just been around as much. Again, 15 plays, like I'm not ready to write off progress and growth from Braxton Jones, but it looked a lot like the Braxton Jones that we remembered, and not some new, improved, fixed, dominant left tackle that's really gonna hold down the job. It felt a little bit like last year where, Jones got beat a little bit in pass protection, but was generally, it was better there than in the running game where he was struggling to kind of sustain blocks there. And I think in the reverse end, like Theo was run blocking a little bit better, but, still not doing a ton better in pass protection either. And this is already after they had tried the Karan Amagaji, Jedrick Wills combination in the first preseason game. And now we've seen 4 different left tackles take the field for the Bears in 2 preseason games, all 4 with a chance to win this starting job. And none of them have looked particularly head and shoulders dominant first place leader. But I do think it's interesting that Braxton Jones plays with the starters, comes out of the game, and then never goes back in the game. Like the way that they used him kind of indicated like he's clearly the first team guy, and Theo Benedet is clearly the second team guy at left tackle. It wasn't like in the first preseason game when Amagaji started and did the first quarter, then Jedrick Wills came in and did the second quarter, and then Amagaji did the third quarter, and then Jedrick Wills came back in the fourth quarter, and it was clearly this kind of 50-50 split of, I don't know, we don't know who the better player is, so we're going to give them kind of equal time to see who we might think the better player is. That was not the approach with Braxton Jones and Theo Benedet in this game. It was all Braxton Jones, and then he was done, and then it was all Theo for a while, and then he was done, and then I think Karan played left tackle down the stretch as the third string left tackle. But it wasn't this Braxton Jones does some, Theo does some, and then Braxton does some, and then Theo does some. They were treating it like, hey, Braxton Jones is the starter, Theo Benedet is the backup. I still think the competition is considered open, but it wasn't as like 50-50 as maybe I'd like it to be at this point, just given that Braxton played poorly. And maybe Braxton Jones is practicing a lot better and performing better in practice than he did in that preseason game. And there's a lot more snaps of practice that the Bears have evaluated than just the 15 snaps we saw of him in that preseason game. So like that does not paint the entire picture of the Braxton Jones experience right now. And let's keep in mind too, he missed like 10 days or so of training camp with an injury this year. So he wasn't out there getting a ton of reps over and over again. But like in Theo Benedet's defense as well, he spent all of training camp at right tackle and even played right tackle in this game when Darnell Wright came out before moving over to left tackle to replace Braxton Jones. So they're still swinging him back and forth between both sides and not just giving Theo, hey, you got to play left tackle, master left tackle, be the best left tackle you can. They're saying, no, compete to start at left tackle, but also keep playing right tackle too. And it doesn't feel quite like a 50-50. They're on equal level. They're it feels like they're giving Braxton Jones the leg up and not making it that easy for Theo. And maybe Braxton Jones has earned that in practice. I'm not sure, but it's just an interesting approach. And it makes me feel like they are higher on Braxton Jones still than maybe we are based on what we've seen. And they've seen more. So I'm certainly willing to give Ben Johnson and Dan Rochard the benefit of the doubt there and understand that in a regular season game, their game plan is going to help the left tackle if he's going up against a tough pass rusher. There's going to be more tight ends and running backs lining up over there and helping over there the way that they did last year for Braxton and Theo and Ozzy. And I think that we're willing to put Braxton Jones a little bit more one-on-one in this situation when it's a preseason game. Doesn't really matter all that much as long as your quarterback's not getting hit. And they were able to avoid that. So I guess mission accomplished. Caleb was untouched. Nobody majorly important got hurt. And those are kind of the two biggest things from any preseason game in my eyes. The next biggest thing is probably how guys are starting to cement and secure their spot on the 53-man roster. So I want to go through a few players that are far from household names that were on the bubble heading into camp and really seem to have cemented themselves now with really back-to-back strong showings in this preseason so far. We'll go through the names that are going to be sticking on this regular season team and might make an impact some point this season that didn't really make one last year and you might not be all that familiar with. We'll go through some of those names to know next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Home Chef. Life gets busy, and figuring out what's for dinner every night can quickly become another thing on your to-do list. But Home Chef takes the stress out of mealtime by delivering fresh ingredients and easy-to-follow recipes right to your door. Whether you're looking to eat healthier, save money on takeout, or simply spend less time grocery shopping and meal planning, Home Chef makes cooking at home convenient and enjoyable with more than 30 meal options every week. And people really love it. Home Chef is rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedonnfl. That's homechef.com/lockedonnfl for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/lockedonnfl must be an active subscriber to keep receiving the free dessert. So when we move past the struggles with the starters and the uncertainty with the left tackle battle, that was a lot of the negative coming out of the game. There were still positives to take away from this contest. And for me, there were a handful of players that cemented their spots on the 53-man roster that, barring injury or some other kind of, free agent signing or disruption to the roster somewhere, a trade or whatever it might be, that there's some guys that have played well enough through 2 preseason games and continue to get the big important opportunities out there to say, yeah, the Bears see those guys as part of your 53-man roster who can potentially make some kind of impact in the regular season, whether that's on offense, defense, or even potentially special teams. A couple guys I think have really kind of cemented their status. One of them was one of the breakout players from the first preseason game that had a quieter game against the Bengals, but I don't think we should overlook that. Caden Davis, the wide receiver, we got to know with making some big catches against the Browns and has been a playmaker at practice. He was the kickoff and punt return guy in this game, but didn't have any catches, had 1 target on offense. But to me, he is making this roster, and it's because of his contributions on special teams. That in this game, they trusted him as the first string kickoff return player and first string punt return player. With Luther Burden injured, obviously he would be back there in that consideration. And Khalif Raymond is going to be back there in that consideration as well. But for them to go to Caden Davis first as that next guy up said a lot. And he continues to play more and more in other phases of special teams. He was the gunner a number of times on punts in this game and was on kickoff coverage before as well in the first preseason game, has earned more and more special teams opportunities. And when we talk about a guy at the bottom of the depth chart at wide receiver, that's all about what you can do on special teams. All your offensive snaps are going to go to Rome Odunze and Luther Burden and Khalif Raymond, and Xavier Thomas will have a role. Jade Walker will have some kind of role. But if Caden Davis is going to stick as the number 6 guy, you're not going to use your 6 wide receiver on offense very much. He's going to have to be a special teams player. And he's got the combination of return ability and coverage and blocking ability when he's not the return man on special teams. And to me, you can cement in those 6 wide receivers on your 53-man roster. I don't think there's much of a chance for anybody else to unseat any of them, again, barring injury. And assuming Luther Burden's good to go, then if he's still banged up, maybe you keep an extra one there. But for now, I think even despite not having a catch on offense, it was a really important game for Caden Davis securing his spot. Same thing for 6th-round rookie Jordan Vandenberg. The defensive lineman has become really the preseason star for the Chicago Bears. And he came into training camp not guaranteed a 53-man roster spot. Not every draft pick makes the 53-man roster, especially 6th and 7th round guys have to earn it kind of like undrafted players do and like any other veteran that they bring in the offseason. But Vandenberg continues to show the speed, the strength, the motor, the physicality, the hustle to the ball that you love to see. But, he came in at a position with 2 established veteran starters with Gervon Dexter and Grady Jarrett, and they used they've used their free agency to sign 3 veterans in Neville Gallimore, Kentavious Street, and James Lynch. And so Jordan Vandenberg came into camp as kind of the number 6 defensive tackle if you stacked them all vertically. And the Bears are not going to keep 6 defensive tackles, almost certainly. I mean, I guess if there's an injury type situation, perhaps, and if they see James Lynch because he can play some edge rusher in addition to D tackle, maybe they can kind of keep him as a hybrid player. But the point being is like Vandenberg was the odd man out at the start of this process and someone they could try and stash on the practice squad. But he has played so well and earned first team reps. It was out there with Dayo Odengbo and Gervon Dexter on the defensive line next to him, like with starters in this preseason game and playing very well. Like he absolutely has cemented his spot on this Bears 53. I think for sure Kentavious Street is locked into this 53. Neville Gallimore is locked into 53. And then obviously Dexter and Jarrett. So that would make Jordan Vandenberg your 5th. And it's a question of whether James Lynch sticks, at some way, shape, or form. But like Kentavious Street started this game for Grady Jarrett. So he is definitely locked in. Gallimore, they gave the biggest contract to in free agency among the defensive tackles. He's locked in, and Vandenberg has played so well that he has locked himself in. I'm pretty sure running back Roschon Johnson has 2, which is a very encouraging sign for someone that we thought might get cut at this point in the process, just given that we're in year 4 for him and hasn't really done much the last couple seasons and has been injured on and off, and he does still need to stay healthy to secure his spot on the 53-man roster. But he too, wasn't like some dominating offensive performance, but he was the running back on the field for every snap of the first drive and continued every snap of the second drive. He didn't come out of the game until I wrote down the timestamp, and now I can't find it. I want to say it was like 3 minutes left in the first quarter or so is when under 3 minutes to go in the first quarter is when the backup Salvon Ahmed came in for Roschon Johnson. But clearly, they've been giving Roschon a lot of run, seeing him healthy, seeing him out there blocking well and contributing quite a bit on special teams and trying to find his way on this 53-man roster. I think they know what they have in him and like that. And not that Ahmed is going to be a goner necessarily, but I think they're leaning Roschon at this point based on everything they have shown us in the preseason game, knowing that I don't think any other team is going to take Salvon Ahmed as a running back, and he'll be out there in free agency if the Bears need to bring him back or throw him on the practice squad or anything like that. I think Roschon has really secured his spot there. And the last guy I want to throw into this conversation is I don't want to say he has cemented his roster spot, because his roster spot depends 100% to me on how healthy everyone else is at his position. But when you look in this Bears secondary, cornerback Dante Manning has not been perfect by any means and gave up a couple of bad touchdowns in this game, but also had 2 or 3 pass breakups that were particularly impressive. And I think that's the kind of playmaking kind of boom or bust corner that Al Harris and Dennis Allen have really latched onto these last couple of seasons. He started this game opposite Jalen Johnson because Tyreek Stevenson wasn't playing and Terrell Smith wasn't playing. But that would still make Dante Manning your number 4 or number 5 cornerback, because I guess Malik Muhammad was on the field as the outside cornerback in base defense, but then when they went to the nickel, Malik Muhammad would move in the slot, and then Dante Manning was in on the field on the outside. When you had 3 corners on the field, it was Jalen, Malik Muhammad, and Dante Manning. And so that makes him at worst right now the number 5 cornerback. He was out there before Josh Blackwell. He was out there before Beanie Bishop, who had the 2 interceptions in the first preseason game. And so I think as long as Kyler Gordon remains injured and kind of, I don't want to say AWOL because he traveled with the team and was at the game, but just as long as there's no clarity on Kyler Gordon's future, and we haven't seen cornerback Jalen Jones in a month at this point, as long as those guys remain out, I think Dante Manning is the guy who makes the team in their place, that they keep Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Malik Muhammad. We haven't hardly seen Terrell Smith this preseason, so I don't know whether he's in or not, but even if they keep him, Josh Blackwell and Dante Manning would be 5 and 6 right now on that depth chart, and that's kind of where they would roll with. So, well, I don't think Dante Manning was particularly like dominant. I think he has shown enough, and more importantly, the Bears have shown a ton of faith in him to say, hey, he might be a guy they want to stick around with on the 53-man roster, kind of the way that they took a chance on someone like Nahshon Wright last year. Not to say that Manning is going to have whatever 6 interceptions like Nahshon Wright did this past season, but he's someone who will play some special teams that they have faith in and are showing their trust in as an outside cornerback in Dennis Allen's defense. And so for now, he's someone that I'm penciling in a little bit more based on injury. If everyone gets back healthy before week 1, he's going to be the odd man out. But like, he's the one benefiting the most from the cornerback injuries. And we saw last year, it seemed like every cornerback on the Bears roster ended up playing defensive snaps in the regular season. So he's somebody we should have our eyes on just in case that position gets decimated once again, because we're already seeing it get banged up in training camp in the preseason. Safety is also right there in that conversation. And Dante Manning has been the beneficiary of that all along throughout this process so far. And now we've got 2 preseason games worth of tape to say, yep, he looks to be the guy, because the Bears have to cut down to their 53-man roster in a week. I believe it's like Sunday. I think it's the 30th. August 30th is Sunday, is the cut down day to go to 53. So like, they're going to have the joint practice with the Titans on Thursday, game on Saturday, cut down on Sunday. Like, they got to make some very quick decisions. And so I think a lot of their decisions are going to be mostly set before Saturday's game. And then if you want to change their mind, you got to really do something big and impressive in Saturday's game. But for now, I think we're kind of trending towards what this roster will look like. We're definitely going to do a full 53-man roster prediction here on the Locked On Bears podcast this week. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming back tomorrow, make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for another opportunity to bear down.